Welcome back to Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty Network. Thank you for tuning in. Got a great episode lined up for you today. We're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics and something that I'm sure most of my audience definitely loves. We're going to be talking about guns, and I got an expert in the field, someone who's been on the podcast before, Salvatore DeGennaro. We're going to dive into talking about gun rights, how it relates to mass shootings, how we can put a stop to this madness. We're going to talk about red flag laws, all of that stuff. So stay tuned, and I'll introduce Salvatore in a moment. Before I get to that, though, I want to thank those of you who have subscribed either to the Finding Freedom podcast, which is my solo podcast feed where you get only these episodes, and those who have subscribed, of course, through the Lions of Liberty podcast feed, where you get all three of our shows. You get our really variety network with Mark's show on Monday and Brian's show on Wednesday. So I don't care which one you subscribe to. If you have trouble finding the Finding Freedom podcast, the solo feed, just search Finding Freedom and my name, John Odermatt, and it'll pop right up. So I want to thank those of you who have subscribed and encourage you to please leave a nice 5-star rating and a review. It really does help with the algorithms. Let's get rolling with today's episode.
We are born free, and we will die free. The time in between, though, that's complicated. In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
All right, I am joined here by Salvatore DeGennaro. This is Salvatore's second time on the podcast. He was on, I thought it was more recently, but I looked back, it was episode 114 back in 2018, which, with everything that's happened between now and then, that feels like a lifetime ago. But he's a firearms instructor, and he writes everywhere. He has a podcast. He has his own blog, Self-Defense RX. And he's an author. He just released a book, 21st Century Minuteman, a guide to personal protection and self-reliance in contemporary America. My screen just went blank in the middle there and came back up. I couldn't finish the title. But Salvatore, welcome to Finding Freedom.
John, thanks for having me back on. Yeah, it was 2018, and so much has changed since, but as it turns out, so much remains the same as well. I listened to that interview, that show that we did, and again, all the topics, they just come up after every one of these tragedies, that like the one we recently saw. So a lot has indeed changed, but again, a lot seems to remain the same, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. We had the COVID lockdowns in the middle, which I think, and I'm going to get around here to you doing more of an introduction of yourself, but the COVID lockdowns in the middle, I think, woke a lot of people up to really realize how little control we have over, certain things in America. Are we able to actually, work? Do we have to inject a pharmaceutical? With the whole masking thing, the lockdown of businesses, people losing their businesses, losing their jobs. So I think a lot more people are awake and are aware and are more open to a lot of the ideas you talk about in the book, and open to the need to be self-reliant, which we'll talk about. So, but before we get into all that stuff and talk about your book, introduce yourself. When people ask you what you do, what do you tell them?
Right, so my name is Salvatore DeGennaro. I write for a number of the well-known firearms outlets online. I write continually for USA Carry. I've written for Concealed Nation in the past. I've been published on The Truth About Guns, Ammo Land, a variety of places. I also have my own blog called Reflex Handgun that focuses, I would say specifically on the defensive handgun. That's the overriding theme, although, again, I address a lot there as well, greater themes of preparedness, etc. firearms instructor. I've been in the field for a long time, been a serious shooter and instructor for a long time. I also wade very heavily into Second Amendment politics because I remind everybody that is the political fight of our time. Don't kid yourself, that is the issue that matters the most. Everything else hinges on it. So, I wade deep into that as well. The book I just published, ironically, I finished writing that book about, I can tell you exactly when I finished it. I literally finished it about a month before COVID-19 was in full swing. So I think I finished that in February of 2020. But I just sat on it and didn't publish it for a while for some reason. But once I got around to actually publishing it, the only thing I changed in those 2 years in the book was I added some further detail to specifically the section on mass shootings, about some further details that I had on several of those events. That's the only thing that changed, because even though we came out of COVID with everybody now as a prepper, the principles remain the same. So, the experience with COVID only reinforced what we should be doing to begin with, if that makes sense.
Oh, that absolutely makes sense. And I think, we've talked about this before on this show, and Mark's gone into it on his show. And it really, going through COVID, it's changed a lot of people to the core. For example, Mark's moved out of the country. He's living in Mexico. I know people, that have moved the state they're living in to try to get, under a more free state government, a less intrusive state government. And it took, as a libertarian, a lot of the time back in 2018, 2017, 2016, we were talking about philosophy and things that could happen. And when you see it play out in front of you, those rights just stripped away, and to see really how little power we have in certain aspects of our life, it makes it real. And it makes it a lot less appealing to talk about the philosophy, and that stuff's all important. That's great. And it makes it a lot more appealing to talk about, well, how do we protect ourselves? How do we make it so we're not so reliant on these government institutions, and we're able to control more so, have more control over what we can control? So I want to get into that, probably maybe the second half of the show. I want to start out talking about mass shootings. And in the book, one of the things that you talk about is that, I think there's this thought that mass shootings are kind of a new thing, but they've actually been around for quite a while. And you cited some older ones that really I wasn't that familiar with, that I think go back to maybe one was in the 70s or so. What were some of those earlier
absolutely.
mass shootings?
So it is nothing new. Now, there has been an escalation in the frequency of them, and in the past decade, you've seen that, decade plus now. I'm convinced it directly correlates with the expansion of social media. Just the escalation of frequency. With that said, it has been a thing for a long time. In fact, the first well-known and still the deadliest till now school attack was the 19 teens or 20s. I would have to look. I don't address that incident in the book, but a guy who was actually an employee at the elementary school planted a bomb in the basement of the school and killed, I want to say, well over 30 kids. So, unfortunately, this is nothing new. Now, if you go back to the 1800s, there was a well-known school massacre that happened with, a Native American tribe attacked some school, and that kind of stuff went on as well. So, unfortunately, all around the spectrum, we have a long history of massacres. You look at the things that have happened to the native tribes. You look at the massacres that went on between whites and the native tribes. Okay, so this whole history of massacres, unfortunately, is nothing new. You have seen an escalation in the past 10 or 12 years. I am really convinced that has a lot to do with the advent and use of social media, because now every freak has an echo chamber that they're able to get into, right, and further fuel these crazy ideas that they have to begin with. But to your point, it's nothing new. I want to say 66, you had the Texas clock tower massacre that happened in Austin, Texas at the university. A guy went up to the top of that clock tower. He killed 15 or 16 people. Again, don't quote me on the exact statistics. I address that in the book, all these horrifying statistics that you've had in these incidents. So it's nothing new, although we have seen an uptick in the frequency, which should lead the person who believes in self-reliance to take pause and say, this is a more and more serious threat that you face anytime that you're in a crowded environment.
Yeah, we've definitely seen an uptick in frequency, but I think hasn't that uptick in frequency been a little bit distorted by the categorization of what is a mass shooting?
Yes, no question. So, to your point, and the mainstream press has been pushing this hard since Uvalde, Texas, is now, they look at everything that is a gang-related shooting, where it used to be, 4 or more people killed. Now it's like 3 or more people just shot and injured. They're counting that as mass shootings. And I remind your audience that the vast majority of mass shootings every year is gangster-on-gangster activity in places like Chicago and Baltimore and all those usual places that have so much firearms freedom. Oh wait, no, I'm thinking of something different. That's right. All those places that are the most restrictive as far as gun rights go, right? That's where we see this play out all the time. But if you look at the more precise definition of what these mass shootings are, they're most often a lone wolf who is going into a place of employment, very often a place of previous employment. We've seen quite a few attacks on houses of worship, and of course, unfortunately, the issue with the schools. Although again, it's a lot less than the press would have you believe, because every time a couple of high school-aged gangsters shoot each other in the parking lot of the school, that's lumped in with the school shooting statistics.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. So in the book, and I would encourage people to definitely get the book, because Salvatore goes into much more detail on these individual mass shootings. And when you compare like the Columbine attack to the Boston Marathon, which wasn't a shooting but was there was a mass casualty event, and comparing to the Las Vegas shooting, where the guy was shooting from very far away. It was like 400, 500 yards away, very elevated. There's no chance you could shoot back. And you talk about the different needs. Really, I mean, if you're the Columbine school attack, of course, you'd like a teacher to have a gun to be able to end it. The Boston Marathon, you'd like the people around there, the people who put the bomb there were gone, to be able to, help to care for the victims. And then Las Vegas, it's what do you do when someone's shooting at you from above? So can you kind of talk about the need to really understand each unique situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the more stereotypical active shooter events that you're going to have, if you're at ground zero, when the threat presents itself and you have the option to neutralize the threat with gunfire, that's obviously the thing to do. But there's been many of these incidents where that is not necessarily the case. So, for example, Boston Marathon bombing. They planted an explosive device and they were out of there. So in the aftermath of something like that, the most important thing you can consider is, how is your medical training? Do you know how to apply tourniquets? Do you know how to apply pressure dressings and keep people alive? If you look at that incident in particular, there were many injuries to the lower extremities, the legs, because of the way the blast was. There were many amputations below the waist. So do you know how to apply a tourniquet? Do you carry a tourniquet on you? If you're in a crowded environment like that, do you carry a day pack and have a full-blown trauma kit on you? This is a very important thing. And realistically, trauma medicine is something in your lifetime you're more likely to use than you ever are to use your defensive handgun. How many car wrecks have most of us come across, on the highway, where maybe you have to help somebody out who has traumatic bleeding. So, take a basic stop the bleed course. They're available all over the country. That is one of the very few productive things that the Obama administration did, was they actually instituted the Stop the Bleed course. So like local fire departments and all of that offer Stop the Bleed. It's similar to CPR. It's about a 2-hour course. They teach you how to apply a tourniquet, how to apply pressure, how to apply a pressure dressing. Better yet is take a TCCC course, which is a full day thing, shows you how to apply chest seals, that kind of thing. So it's not hard. But, some hands-on training with how to do that, you can save a lot of lives. So you want to consider those aspects beyond just being armed and being capable of shooting threats in the face, which is very important. If more of us made that a part of our daily life, we'd see a lot less of these incidents happen, right? But consider that. Consider your medical, and you mentioned Vegas, which is a very perplexing incident until now. That is, again, we come back to medical, have medical to treat you and yours. But also, when you go into an arena like that was such an unusual circumstance. He was 400 yards away and like 30 stories off the ground. You're not going to hit that guy with your handgun, obviously, right? So it's a matter of, where are my exits? Where is cover? When you go to when you go to a big event like that, don't feel compelled to be right next to the stage. I hate that anyway, being clustered in, with thousands of people around you. Be somewhere where you can get to the exits. Be somewhere near cover, right? Most of these locations have pretty hard cover that can offer cover even against rifle fire. So you need to know your surroundings. No link-up points. Are you there with younger kids, but maybe teenagers, maybe not little kids who you have to be attached to, but hey, is your teenager there? We'll have a link-up point. If something goes bad, where are we linking up? Is that at the car in the parking lot, or maybe across the street at the 7-Eleven, whatever the case may be? Right?
That's really good advice. And I mean, when it comes to concerts, I mean, I'm guilty of this too. You kind of get in a state of mind where you just kind of you relax, you maybe have a couple beers, and you're not thinking. And it's not that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not that you need to be stressed out the whole concert. But put some thought in when you walk in the place. Look around. Okay, how do I get out of here? Maybe I don't want to be at the front of this crowd where I'm trapped in there. Maybe get back a little bit, get towards an exit, and still relax, have a good time, enjoy the music, but have a plan.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's not a matter of being paranoid, and the gunfighter thing, sitting with your back against the wall. Later in the book, I talk about this, looking at a public place, and it's literally a process that should take you only a few seconds. For example, think of something more mundane. You walk into a restaurant. Know who's there. See what they're doing, right? Take note of where your exits are. Take note of where the most likely place of threat will be. Like usually that's the cash registers in most places, right? So you literally can scan your environment and within a few seconds say, hey, who's here? Do I see anything out of the ordinary? What is the baseline? What should people be doing? And do I see individuals not doing that make me say, hey, what is this person doing? Guy sitting in a restaurant, not eating, not talking, and looking nervous, right? Something's wrong. Okay, the best thing to do is just go eat at a different restaurant. Don't hang around. You talk about big crowds, exactly. You walk into, have a good time at the concert or at the ball game. That's, we have to live life, right? That's important, quality of life. But walk in and have a plan. Say, okay, if things were to kick off right now, what would I do? Where are my loved ones? Where's my closest exit? That's all. Just have a plan, and certainly where you can be armed, be armed.
So I want to get your opinion on, we were talking about Uvalde a little bit and what happened there. And this isn't the first time we've seen this happen. I believe Stoneman Douglas, a similar thing happened where the police show up and do not go in, do not enter and actually try to put down the shooter. So what's your take on what happened there? And is this something that is this police training? Is this what they're trained to do now, to not go in?
Yeah, the thing is, I have no law enforcement background, so I don't like to get too critical of what I see, especially considering that you see how these things always are. More and more information comes out over time. So even now, more information has come out, but every bit that comes out, it just looks worse and worse. So in this case, we can't say, oh, we don't have all the facts yet. Maybe we just don't know what really happened. At this point, we're saying, yeah, we kind of know what happened, and basically they did not go in the way they should have. And then they're, tasing and pepper spraying parents in the parking lot. So, John, what it reminds me of is if you go back to Hurricane Katrina, and I talk about this in the book. Hurricane Katrina was a major event for the psychology of this country because what we saw was the government will do nothing to help you, and then when they do show up, they actually hurt you. Okay, so in Hurricane Katrina, the local city government showed up and confiscated people's guns. Congress actually passed an act after that to say that cannot happen, right? But again, you can never trust these entities when things go down. In this school incident, we see something similar, right? You see parents trying to get into the school, and the authorities of the state are actually holding them back when they refuse to go in there themselves. So you have a breakdown. It's a social breakdown. Many of my friends who are ex-law enforcement say that a society gets the police that it deserves. And to a great extent, that's true. So if you look at the past 2 years of the defund the police movement, police are now at the point. It's two things. We've had now. There's a lot of things terrible that they've done, and they should be held accountable for. Right. I am no bootlicker. I am very. I try to play fair with this, but I'm generally not a big fan of law enforcement. I'll just leave it with that because I see too many of these incidents go on. A lot of great individuals in law enforcement, but overall, I am not a fan of the training, the lack thereof, should I say, and I'm not a fan of a lot of the things that go on, like, no-knock warrants, no-knock raids, all of that, as far as I'm concerned, is completely unconstitutional and should go away entirely, okay? So what we have is a combination of poor training combined with poor morale, because we've had a lot of incidents where officers do the right thing and the public hates them for it anyway. Okay, and it's combined now with this whole militarization, which, quite frankly, I'm opposed to. Again, if we got rid of no-knock raids, then all of these MRAPs and armored vehicles and all that crap can go away. Because if your average officer has a patrol carbine in the car and he's got armor, and if he's trained, there's nothing he should face that he can't handle. Okay, and that's the truth, right?
He's not in a war zone.
Right, exactly. So it's a combination of things, because when I see those cops holding people back outside of the school and not going in themselves, I see a bunch of guys who are LARPing, right? Live action role playing. So you're standing there like a tough guy wearing armor and your rifle, yet you're not going in to solve the problem. And, I would ask people, if you look at well-known police officers of the past, in decades past. Think of well-known gunfighters like Jimmy Cirillo in New York City, and back before that, guys like Charles Askins and Bill Jordan on the Texas Border Patrol. Those guys would never make it in the police force today, right, because they wouldn't last in the political climate. But I'll ask people, how long do you think it would have taken those guys to have gone in that school and done what needed to be done, right? It's not even a question, right? They'd be in there and solve the problem. So we kind of get the police that we deserve as a society, unfortunately, and we're starting to see that now in this incident, in the Parkland incident. We're seeing that, right? So if the police force is about having people who just want the job and to collect a pension, and their priority is making it home at night, which is understandable. That you can say that when, hey, I had to drop the hammer on this guy who's trying to kill me because I am also a person who deserves to make it home at night. That's one thing. But that's not the job description, okay? When children are being slaughtered, your main priority should not be making it home at night. It should be stopping this maniac from killing children. So we've got the police we deserve now as a society, sadly.
Yeah, I think we've got the police we deserve it as a society, and we've got the public school system we deserve as a society. Not to say we should even have a public school system, but we do.
I'm on board. I'm on board with you, and I'll take it a step further. There was a recent study that shows that 90% of people in education, public and higher education, self-identify as left of center, and we know that most of them are very left. So what you have is a population of people who absolutely hate personal responsibility, right? So you're dealing with the hardest segment of the population to get them to take ownership of their own safety and the safety of those kids in the place, whether it comes down to even keeping doors locked. Right, keep the doors locked. Verify who's coming in. Let alone getting armed staff and teachers in that place to be able to deal with these threats if they do make it in.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to my next point. So, a lot of people on the right, conservatives, libertarians, will say, well, what we need to do is we need to have, either armed security or armed teachers in schools. And I agree. And the school that my daughter goes to, that there's an armed officer or two that are there. My neighboring school district, the one that I grew up in, they're so lefty progressive that they have officers there that are not armed. They don't have a weapon. So what good is there for them to be there? So that's the problem. Like, yes, in conservative areas, maybe you can get it so teachers can be armed or police officers can be armed to stop a threat. But in these liberal cities, they're not going to pass anything. So it's just going to stay a gun-free zone, and no one's going to be armed to protect the children.
Yeah, exactly right. And then coming out of this, okay, as the conservative areas now secure the schools, we all know where the next massacre is going to happen. It's not going to, well, for example, it doesn't happen now where we know that it can be dealt with. For example, the counties in Texas that have the Guardian program, they've had that now for well over a decade. Spoiler, Uvalde was not one of those school districts, right? But the school districts in Texas have what's called the Guardian program, where they have armed and trained staff in those schools. They've never had an incident. And the entire state of Utah, who is the only state in the union that they allow concealed carriers to carry on public school and higher ed campus, they've never had a mass shooting. And they also have a program with specialized training that school teachers and staff can carry. In fact, on our show, the CCX2 show, that is a combination between USA Carry and Concealed Nation. For those of you interested, it's every other Tuesday night. We a few weeks ago we had a.
And is that just live, or is that also available as a
No,
podcast?
it's available. Like you can go to the Facebook pages or the YouTube channels for either of those sites and see all the back episodes. But we had an attorney on who he is from Utah, and in fact he's a professor at a university in Utah, and he was discussing that they estimate any given day of the week in Utah there are 60,000 people carrying a concealed weapon on campus. Do we see blood in the streets? Do we see people accidentally shooting themselves? Do we see teachers who decide, oh, they're just going to snap because they're having a bad day and kill everyone? We see none of that, right? We see none of those predictions. What we do see, however, is no mass shootings. You can research this. Look at Utah's history, there's no mass shootings. Okay, so there is a deterrence there that only comes from having non-uniformed people who are armed. Because what these guys want is they want to rack up the next record body count. So they're going in looking for 50 or more kills. A guy in uniform, there was a guy in uniform outside of Uvalde, and he did not engage the shooter. The guy just avoided him and went in a back door. Okay. Same thing in Columbine. There was an SRO who shot it out with those two guys. Most people don't realize that. They just went to the other side of the school and entered.
The Uvalde shooting, the story started, the first information, as you talked about, how the information changes. It started that he engaged with the shooter, but he did not.
Turns out he did not engage. He flat out did not engage. He saw the shooter but did not engage. So my point is, though, that men in uniform can be identified. They can either be avoided or they can be killed first. It's when you have people who are in civilian dress who may be carrying handguns that is the dissuading factor, because the guy wants to come in and rack up a body count. He does not want to come in and maybe shoot 2 or 3 people and then get shot in back of the head by Miss Frizzle, the math teacher. Right? That's what he doesn't want. So therefore, when you see the school districts that are going with armed staff, I guarantee there are not going to be attacks in those locations. There will be further attacks in the places that refuse to do so.
Yeah. It's a sad situation.
It is sad, John. The one thing I would say, though, is, I'm all for hardening the schools, and the best way to do that is armed staff and teachers. I also don't want to turn the schools into a prison, right? And there is pushback against that, because we do have to stay realistic about it. Okay, there are like 90,000 plus private schools in the country. Since 2012, since Sandy Hook, there has been, the real number is roughly 100 on school ground. Okay, so if you look at do the statistics, your child is about 3,000 times likely to die in drive school any given day, right? We keep it in perspective. An event like this, and we have to do something about it. I would come back to, when we talk about the pollution, these give away our rights for something that is exceedingly rare. Giving up rights is not going to solve that way.
Your internet's going in and out just a little bit just now for the past like 30 seconds.
Oh boy, I'm seeing that. I hope it hear me.
I can hear you still, yeah.
Okay.
It looks like mine's fine.
All right. We'll hope it hangs on.
Yeah, it's still the video keeps freezing. Seems good right now at the moment.
Okay. Fingers crossed.
We'll get started again. So I do want to take a pivot from talking about mass shootings and bring up a topic that you talk about in the book, a mindset of self-reliance. And we talked about at the beginning, what had happened, COVID and lockdowns and all this stuff, mandatory vaccination between the last time you were on the show and this time on the show. I'm curious first, did COVID, did the lockdowns, did that response change the way you think about self-reliance like it did many other people? Did it change anything about how you look at this stuff?
No, it reinforced it. So one thing, though, it did change for myself. As you look during the lockdowns, I reconsidered, staying stocked up on things that we may not have considered before that. Yeah, you need food and water and guns and beans, bullets, band-aids, all that. But yeah, you need toilet paper too, right? So those kind of things, I think most people will come out of the situation thinking at least that. I can tell you that something that it greatly reinforced for me is I talk about it in the book, and I've talked about it many other places, and you will hear about this anytime you read the serious prepper stuff. That is having bug out plans. Well, that's very important, but you also have to have bug in plans, being able to hold up in the home. And, as we saw in COVID, most people, didn't bug out. What's the point of bugging out anywhere? Okay, it's a nationwide emergency that you just have to lock down at home. So I would tell people that wherever you live, and even if you live, in an apartment in Manhattan, I don't know what you're thinking if you do, but, if you do, you even if your primary plan for any kind of disaster is to bug out, right, to go somewhere else, if you have friends or family where you can go, or if you have property elsewhere, that's great, and you need those plans because there's many reasons you may need to flee the vicinity. You also have to have the plan, though, to hold up where you are, where you live for an indeterminate amount of time, because depending on what happens, you may not be able to leave. So you need both plans in place. And I think COVID, at least to some degree, really solidified my thinking with that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. And I mean, it's one thing I'm guilty of is, yes, we have some food stored up and have the toilet paper and things like that. But is it how long is it enough to last for? I think needing to double down on that to make it. Could we make it 30 days if we needed to? Probably, but I mean, it needs to be a definite. You need to have a plan in place that we could stay there 30 days and not have to leave to buy food or anything, and have enough water, which I think that's something that really everybody needs to take a look at right now.
Oh, absolutely. And again, the answer may be different for everybody, right? So depending on the resources around you, you may need to store less. But man, if you're in an urban or suburban area, my advice would be to at least have the starting point of being able to weather a crazy event so that you don't have to go out, right? If you only have 2 or 3, like the average home, they've done studies on this, literally has only 3 days of food in the house, which just blows my mind. I would say the absolute bare minimum starting point is have a month worth of everything your household needs to eat, at least a month. That way you can weather these issues of And it doesn't have to be a pandemic, okay? Think of a natural disaster that cuts you off. Hurricane Katrina, there were areas of the city that literally were cut off for 2 weeks plus. So do you have water and food for your family for 2 weeks plus? Water may be more a matter of having what you need to purify the water than actually storing it, right? You look at a flood, yeah, there's plenty of water, but you can't drink the water unless you purify it, So consider that. Do I have what I need to make it so that I'm not helpless and I have to go, line up at some kind of, National Guard trucks bringing in food to people? Do you really want to deal with that when a situation like that is unfolding? No, you want to be autonomous and independent. So that's one of the aspects of the overall mindset of self-reliance, like you're talking about, which I hit on hard in the book. Part of that overall mindset is being truly independent if things go bad.
Yes. So what are the components? You don't have to list them all, but some of them, because you go into it in the book. What are the components of that self-reliant mindset? And other than, we talked about prepping and food. Other than that, what are some things people need to do or should do to build that mindset?
Yeah, so where it starts, and this is something that's not new for me, certainly. I've been studying this phenomenon literally since I was a kid. I'll give you an example, and I think I mentioned this specifically in the book. When I was 12 years old, the Kylene, Texas Luby's Cafeteria massacre happened. And in that event, a guy ran his pickup truck right through the glass of the front of the place. He walked around murdering people for 10 minutes, uncontested. And I remember as a kid reading a witness account in the newspaper where the witness said, yeah, we just laid under tables hoping our turn wouldn't come. And finally somebody threw a table through a window and everybody started evacuating through that broken window. And that really struck me that, you have a whole restaurant filled with people. And even if they're unarmed, okay, an entire restaurant just laying under tables waiting to be executed. With what's going through the mind, I can't believe this is happening, right? That is what every single survivor of violence will report back. I can't believe it was happening. I can't believe it would happen here. I can't believe it would happen to me. I can't believe it would happen in a small town like this. So the first part of this whole mindset of self-reliance, and I call it a mindset of self-reliance because, as you can see in the book, the whole self-defense and prepping aspect are one and the same. Like, you have to do both. If you don't do both, then you're wasting your time. What good does it do you to have, 10 years worth of food in your house if you get mugged by the neighborhood crackhead and can't defend yourself, right? So you have to have both, okay? So the mindset starts with accepting that it can happen to you. And again, to your point about COVID, coming out of that, I think the whole nation has a little bit better mindset where we realize, hey, this can happen. There can be food shortages. There can be disruptions. And if you look at people who survive things like Hurricane Katrina, the mindset is there. Hey, this can happen to you. I don't care where you live. I don't care how small your neighborhood is. I don't care how friendly all your neighbors are. Ask Stephen Williford, the hero of the Texas church shooting, who ran across the street to intercept that guy who was massacring people at the street. That town is literally a town with only 600 people. He literally knows everybody in the town, okay? And he was at the funeral of 25 of his, neighbors, basically, and he said, who would think it would ever happen here, right? So that's the first step. It can happen to you. And it can happen anywhere, whether that's violence or, a natural disaster, the next pandemic, micro or macro scale. It can happen to you, and it can happen anywhere. And that's the beginning of forming that mindset, is just accepting that.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I think many people now, at least who would be listening to this podcast, are probably nodding along with you saying, yes, I agree that it can definitely happen here. So we talked about the food aspect of it a little bit. So from a protection aspect, at a minimum, someone who owns a home, what do you think, people should have in order to protect their home from a firearm standpoint?
Yeah, firearms are a major component of this, right? Because when things really get bad, there's this whole industry that caters to self-defense with alternate weapons, etc. But that's to cater to people who don't really want to commit, right? So if you're serious about being able to defend your home, to defend your family, whether that's for the average guy who comes in the night and kicks in your door to come rob the place, or for a major event of social collapse, right? Firearms are what we need to be talking about. And, even in situations where there's widespread social collapse, again, you think of Hurricane Katrina type incidents, the handgun remains the centerpiece for what the civilian is going to be doing. And why I say that is the power of the handgun is not just the ballistic power of it, which pales in comparison to a rifle or a shotgun, right? And anybody who's the least bit familiar with firearms realizes that. The true power of the handgun is that you can wear it concealed and nobody knows you have it.
Well, ask Joe Biden about that. Joe Biden says that a handgun's going to blow
well,
out
yes,
your
the
lungs.
9mm can blow your lungs out your back, and so I'm still looking for that 9mm ammo. I can't find it. I would buy a case of it if I can find it, but I can't. So, but the handgun. The thing is, even if you're dealing with social collapse or look at the riots that we've had, etc., you want to be able to be mobile and you want to be concealed with your weaponry, okay? So the handgun really remains, I'm big into like the prepper fiction, I don't know if you've ever read that stuff. Like it's all kind of similar, it's like after whatever the collapse is about, is it an EMP, is it just a collapse of the enemy, whatever, and then, what the fiction gets wrong though is that the threat is always the same. It's like some kind of bike gang of like hundreds of guys who are like a bad biker gang roving the wilderness and like attacking people in their homesteads. I mean, if you look historically, that's really not what happens. But what does happen is as soon as things collapse, whether it's just regional or an entire country, the criminal element that's already there is now running wild. Okay, so again, the nature of violence is most often it takes you by surprise. It may not kick in your door where you have time to grab your AR-15. It may take you by surprise when you're out working in the garden. Are you going to be wearing your AR-15? Probably not, right? But if you're switched on, you'll be wearing a concealed handgun. So that's the basis, okay, for the citizen self-defender, honestly, even for most law enforcement, okay? They have carbines in the car, but if you look at the vast majority of times, those guys need a gun to save life. It's the handgun they're wearing, okay? So the handgun is really the focus. On top of that, look at fortifying your home defense with shotgun or rifle. Whatever. I think if you're serious about this stuff and want to be prepared for truly dark days as a nation we may face, you should have a rifle and all support material for that. AR-15, that kind of rifle.
We joked about that Joe Biden comment, talking about handguns. But do you think that they're legitimately, or do you think they legitimately will try to come after handguns in this country? It seems absurd. They would come after anything that they deemed capable of happening. They will take everything. There is the AR-15 is the gun they've demonized because they've always considered that the low-hanging fruit. The truth is they get no traction with that now because it's no longer low-hanging fruit. It's the most common gun in the country. There's 20 million of them in circulation, right? So the reason they've always gone after it, well, I think there's two reasons. I think leftists hate the idea that a citizen would have essentially the same gun that the wards of the state have, right? So that is, I'm convinced, the main reason they hate it. But if they could take every lever-action rifle and pump-action shotgun, they'd take all of that too. They'd take handguns. The reason that they get just less traction with handguns is every soccer mom living in the suburbs has a 9mm handgun right in the closet for home defense. Whereas even that soccer mom may be in the stupid mindset of, oh, but nobody needs an AR-15, right? Leave my Glock alone, but nobody needs an AR-15, which of course is absurd. Some of the worst mass murders have been committed with handguns. Yeah, that soccer mom may have been, making, when was that, in 2018 or whenever, she might have been making videos sawing an AR-15 in half, but she still had her handgun in her closet for protection.
Yeah, exactly. So they just get less traction with that. But absolutely, I mean, Biden is one of the worst anti-gunners that's been in our government, unfortunately, for decades, right? So he was one of the architects of the '94 assault weapons ban, and he's totally ignorant. Now, he's literally so stupid on the subject that I'm inclined to say, yeah, he literally just doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, people like Charles Schumer and these other leftist politicians know they're smart guys. I detest them, but they're smart guys, right? They have an agenda. Biden, I literally think part of the reason he's so anti is the man literally has no concept of anything he's talking about, but he's the exception. Most of them know exactly what they're talking about, but they prey upon ignorance to push their agenda.
So let's talk about something seriously nefarious that's going on now that has both support on the left and the right with these red flag laws. I just saw, I think it was the governor of Texas who was at a GOP convention in Texas, and he was talking about red flag laws, and he got booed. So it looks like something is going to be passed. I don't know if it'll get through the Senate and the House. But
yes, it may be a watered-down version of red flag laws because the GOP now is getting enormous pushback from their base saying no to the red flag laws, which is a completely unconstitutional construct. Okay, so what that would allow is, let's say that you have an ex-girlfriend, right, that you dated 3 years ago. She still hates your guts, obviously, right? So she decides to make I think he's a danger to me. He said, or whatever, and next getting raided and getting your guns confiscated. That is what flag laws would allow for, okay? And needless to say, anybody who has reverence at all for the Constitution should realize that's a really bad idea.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back into when we look at what President Trump did with banning bump stocks, and really was not a friend to the Second Amendment.
No, he was not. He was not. Absolutely correct.
But still gets the support of the NRA. It still gets the support of conservative gun enthusiasts. I'm just interested to get your opinion because you're kind of someone. I mean, you're very much in the gun community, but I know you lean libertarian. So.
Yeah, well, so here's the reality, right? We go with what's the better hand to play, and that is usually the Republicans. If you're talking about gun rights, right? There's a lot of rhinos, right, who will turn on us, but it is not baked into the Republican platform, this civilian disarmament, which is literally part of the Democrat platform, right? Now, there's some exceptions. There's some Democrats who are good on guns, but very few, just like most Republicans are pretty good on guns, some are not, okay? So, but overall, as the two parties, your safer bet is the Republican Party for gun rights. Now, ironically, if you want to talk about the last president in our country's history that was truly pro-Second Amendment, no compromise, was, believe it or not, a Democrat, was John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, numerous times, Congress had approached him about signing bills, and he told them he would never sign anything that restricts the right of law-abiding citizens to arm themselves. He was the last president like that. Even Reagan, had said that he was open to an assault weapons ban. Okay, none ever made it to his desk to sign, but he had indicated he would sign it. Bush Jr. I don't think anyone in your audience is a Bush Jr. fan, so I don't think I'm going to hurt any feelings when I say he was not good either. Again, he was better than Kerry would have been, on guns. But or who did he run against the first time? Was it Bob Dole, right? The first, whatever. We come back to the Democrats are just totally out of their mind with it. The Republicans are better for gun rights, but man, a lot of the Republicans are squishy with it too. The Republicans, I hate to say it, many of them just will go whichever way the wind blows, So if you want to make sure none of this stuff passes, be reaching out to those Republican senators. I think the red flags is going to fail. And if something comes out with it, I think it's going to be a very watered-down version. See, the thing is, we don't need that anyway. because there are means and ways to, educate somebody, okay, they're deemed a threat to themselves, etc. The problem with red flags is now it just gives everybody, I mean, some of them, the way they're drafted in some states is like if your neighbor has a problem with you, all they have to do is make a call and say, hey, this guy's a crackpot, I don't like him, I think he's a danger. Next thing you have police knocking at your door. That's absurd. It's an absurdity.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. To see what can really happen with red flag laws. And I mean, and so often with these shootings, when they start looking into it, oh, wait, but the FBI, this guy was on the FBI's radar. He'd actually talked to the FBI. And it's like, what's even happening here? And you could go down a whole different conspiracy rabbit hole with that. But
you can. So one thing I'll mention with that, John, and far be it from me to be sympathetic to the FBI for anything, but we live in the United States. The FBI should not be able just to be throwing people in prison because, oh, he's a weirdo.
I agree.
Right? So there's that, too. So we've heard many of these. To me, it just reinforces the fact that if the state is going to deal with this, it's going to fail because the state fails, government fails, right? Yeah. So you have to be prepared to deal with this on an individual level and at a community level, right? If we apply that to all of these places, we know these mass killings, over 90% of them happen in gun-free zones. There's a reason for that. They want no resistance. So I would give your people the advice that if you want to be politically active in reducing mass shootings, an assault weapons ban ain't going to do nothing. Okay, there's already 120 guns for every 100 people in circulation, so you will never disarm the criminal element no matter what you pass. And I would submit that even if you could, it's still a bad idea, because I just saw a meme the other day, by some anti-gun idiot. It's like a picture of the 19 kids from the school at Heaven's Gate saying, we come from a country where there's a right to guns. Well, you know what? I'd like to make a meme of the 150 million dead people from the 20th century of communist regimes where they came from countries that did not allow civilian ownership of guns. So I would suggest that I don't care how many mass shootings there are, it is not worth, we cannot disarm. We cannot, right? And beyond that, even if you propose it, or we'll get just magically the shootings will go away if we pass restrictions, we know that's absurd. Okay, have people stopped doing drugs with the war on drugs, right? So there are 120 guns for every 100 people in the country. There is nothing that you can pass that will disarm a guy who wants to do something like this. So therefore, the best way to deal with it is have armed people everywhere so that they will eventually realize that they are not going to rack up the next body count. They're going to get shot in the back of the head by, some woman who's there, like what happened in West Virginia. Did you see that, John? That incident of a guy, he pulled a rifle out of his trunk to go shoot up a graduation party, and a woman at the party killed him with her handgun.
I did not see that. Wow.
It happened, yeah, you can look it up. It happened literally, I think, 2 days after the Uvalde shooting. So needless to say, the press wasn't so all over that one because the guy who pulled the AR-15 out of his trunk was a convicted felon. So, a convicted felon, he can't buy a gun. He had one. He had a rifle in his trunk, right? And thank God this woman was carrying her concealed handgun, and she burned him down as soon as he got the first few shots off. He didn't hit anybody, and she killed him right on the spot. So
that's awesome.
That's the way we want to see it happen. And if it happens like that more and more often, we're going to see less of these shootings. Absolutely.
So one more question, and then I want to get your plug so everyone can hear where to buy your book and your podcast and your blog and all that stuff. So concealed carry. What are your top one or two favorites for concealed carry?
10 years ago that would have been a lot easier. Now there's so much good stuff. I can give you some principles rather than recommendations.
Sure. Yeah,
how much gun does somebody want to commit to carrying? Now we have guns that are so small yet significant that they are very tiny yet very shootable and reliable, chambered in 9mm. If you want something small yet very capable, look to guns like the Sig Sauer P365, the Springfield Hellcat. Usually I'm not a big Springfield fan. There's been a lot of issues with their guns. This one is an exception, though. The Hellcat has been really solid. And the M&P Shield Plus. These are guns that are very tiny that carry 10 plus rounds. You can put a 12-round magazine into it. Almost anyone can conceal it in almost anything you're wearing. So that would be my suggestion if you need something small, yet you want to have something that you can really fight with if you need to. If you can make it work, going with the industry standard like a Glock 19 or a Smith & Wesson M&P gives you a lot more gun, right? They're usually much easier to shoot, but they're bigger, right? They're harder to carry. So that's where I would steer people. If you want to be serious about it, but you still need something small, this new breed of they used to be called single stack guns, meaning it's a single stack of ammo. It's not really like that anymore. It's just with the engineering now, it's sort of a stack and a half. So it's still a very tiny and thin gun, yet, with significant capacity in them, 10 rounds, 12 rounds, etc. Those three that I just indicated, I would stick with them, and you can't go wrong.
Yeah. Awesome information. All right, so let's hear the plugs. Where do people buy your book, the podcast, and the blog, and anything else you want to point people towards?
Yeah, you know what? Go to my blog, which is reflexhandgun.com, because you can see my articles I write there. I also keep links out to all the articles I do elsewhere on USA Carry and all of that kind of stuff. You can buy the book right on that blog as well. So it's reflexhandgun.com. You can see my articles. There's a dedicated page to buy the book. So if you want to get into the prepping scene and be prepared for violence of the mundane and ordinary, or to really be prepared for where this country may be going, I would suggest the book. Pick up a copy. Leave me a review on Amazon. Nobody's reviewing my book. I know it's circulating all over, but even if it's a bad review, leave a review.
Don't leave a bad review.
Yeah.
Don't leave bad review.
No, I don't think anybody will have a bad review. But if you feel like writing a bad review, fine, you can do that as well. But anyway, yeah, find everything there. reflexhandgun.com. I do all kinds of stuff focused on self-defense, specifically the handgun, but a lot of the preparedness stuff as well.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today, Salvatore. Appreciate it. Very educational, and I'm sure everyone learned a lot.
Thanks for having me back, John. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you for tuning in for today's interview with Salvatore DeGennaro. As Salvatore talked about on the episode, this is easily one of the most important topics that we'll talk about on this show, Finding Freedom, if not far and away and clearly the most important topic. If we lose our right to bear arms, if we lose our right to defend ourselves, everything else is going to fall by the wayside. So all of our focus needs to be put on preserving these rights and maximizing the amount of freedom that we have to express them. Now, we didn't just talk about guns with Salvatore. We also talked about having the right mindset, having a mindset of self-reliance. And I know that's something that personally I've been focusing on quite a bit since we lived through the lockdowns and the pandemic mania and all of that madness. I hope you have too, and I hope that this podcast has lit a fire under you to explore different ways that you can expand upon your preparedness. So please go and pick up Salvatore's book, and I look to be doing more interviews in the future here focused on the need to be prepared. All right, well, I wanted to thank the new members that we've had recently join the Lions of Liberty Pride. There's been so many who we've had, longtime members, and people come and go, but I'm always excited when we have new people jump on board. So if you yourself want to be one of those new people, there's two ways to join. You can join on Patreon at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, or on Locals. We're on Locals to lionsofliberty.locals.com. With this access, you're going to get access to our private Facebook group. You're going to get access to early interviews. You're going to be able to see a lot of our interviews conducted live, watch them live, comment live, ask questions, all of that good stuff. You get access to discounted merchandise. And then at certain levels, if you join at a high enough level, you can even impact the show and produce your own episode. So please, would love to have you in the Lions of Liberty Pride. It's something that Mark, Brian, and I really do enjoy. And it's really a part of our growth strategy and has been for a long time. So please, if you enjoy what we're doing here, please consider supporting us. Well, guys, it's been an awesome episode this week. I hope you really enjoyed it as much as I did putting it together. And It's a beautiful weekend here in Western Pennsylvania coming up. Hopefully it's the same in your part of the country. Enjoy the summer. Enjoy the warm weather. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.